Effective today, Marcus Bell's no longer with Bellwether Precision. We thank him for his contribution over the years. Applause. Mr. Bell, anything you'd like to say on your way out? I'm still here, ma'am. Fire every one of them. Understood. Consider it done. Not one person in that packed auditorium, not a single one of the 300 employees watching a black man in a rain-soaked jacket carry one cardboard box down the centre aisle and out into a grey November afternoon, had any idea what they were actually watching. They thought they were watching a firing. They were watching the last 2 minutes of a plan that had been running in dead silence for almost a year. The woman on that stage, the one in the cream-coloured suit, the one the business magazines had started calling the operator of the decade, had 4 hours left. By 6 o'clock that evening, she would understand 3 things she did not understand. At 10 in the morning, she would understand what she had just given away. She would understand who had been holding the deed the entire time. And she would understand that the man she'd just had escorted past security, the quiet contractor she called the floor guy, was the only person in that building who owned a single share of what she was about to sell. She thought she'd fired an aging consultant with a temporary badge. She had just fired the only man alive who owned the company underneath her feet. Have you ever been the smallest name in a room you personally built from nothing? Stay with me, because in 4 hours, that misjudgment gets a number attached to it, and the number has a lot of zeros. His name is Marcus Bell. He is 43 years old, and until 8 months before that November morning, he believed one thing without question, that if you build something honestly enough and quietly enough, the truth of what you did will outlast anybody who tries to stand on top of it and take a bow. He was half right. Let me tell you which half. Let's rewind to the morning it all started to come apart, because it started the same way. Every ordinary day of his life started. 5:35 in the morning. Cleveland, Ohio. The sky the flat colour of poured concrete. Snow not falling yet, but thinking hard about it. Marcus stood in a small warm kitchen that smelled like melted butter and cheap good coffee, pressing waffle batter into an iron, while down the hall his son argued with a pair of socks. The boy's name is Theo. He is 6 years old. He believes, with the total conviction only a 6-year-old can manage, in exactly 3 things. That rockets are superior to every other machine ever invented, that waffles are better when they have a nose cone, and that his father is a quiet man who fixes machines for a living. 2 of those 3 things are true. That morning, Marcus cut the waffle so the top point stood up like a nose cone, arranged 4 blueberries down the side for boosters, and slid a folded index card into the lunchbox the way he did every single school day. That day's card said, in block letters a first grader could half read, "Aim high, stay kind, countdown's on you, bud." Theo can't read all of it yet. His teacher told Marcus at conferences that the boy makes her read the note out loud to him twice at lunch, every day, like it's important paperwork. At 7:40, Marcus dropped him at school and watched him run for the doors, backpack thumping. 1 sock grey and 1 sock red, because Theo has decided that matching is a suggestion and not a law. Then Marcus drove 22 minutes to a plant on the industrial east side, with his own last name mounted in steel letters over the front doors, and a laminated contractor's badge in his coat pocket that said he was barely allowed to walk under those letters. You have to understand how a man puts himself in that position on purpose. Marcus's father, Samuel Bell, was a tool and die man, 34 years at a shop off St. Clair, hands like they were carved out of walnut. He used to tell Marcus something over the workbench that Marcus has never once been able to unhear. The steel doesn't listen to your excuses, son. It only answers to your hands. Samuel Bell was a hard man to impress, and he never once said out loud that his boy was better than him. But he said it with his eyes across a shop floor exactly one time, when Marcus was 20, and in that family that look was worth more than a paragraph. 16 years ago, Marcus started Bellwether Precision in a rented 2-bay garage with a second-hand CNC mill that shook on startup, a welder he'd talked a supplier into loaning him, and one stubborn friend named Reuben Cole, who worked the first 2 months for gas money, cold cuts, and the belief that Marcus wasn't crazy. They made parts that are not permitted to fail: aerospace mounting brackets, housings for surgical equipment, components where a defect thinner than a strand of hair means a person on an operating table or in a passenger seat does not go home. Perfection was the product. Quiet was the culture. Marcus liked it that way. 10 years in, the company employed 300 people and had a photograph hanging by the lobby door. The two of them in that first garage, Reuben leaning on the borrowed welder, Marcus squinting into the sun with a face full of stupid hope. Camille came into the story in year 7. She was the loan officer the bank sent to decide whether the growing little shop deserved a bigger line of credit. She spent a whole afternoon looking past the spreadsheets at Marcus's scarred hands and signed off on the loan anyway, then told him over the paperwork that she'd never in her career seen a man be that gentle with something that dangerous. He married her 2 years later. She used to fall asleep against his shoulder at the kitchen table with her laptop still open and glowing. When Theo was born, she cried over his fingernails, called them the tiniest machined parts in the world. Nobody on this earth made Marcus laugh the way that woman did. When Theo was 18 months old, Camille got sick. The illness doesn't get named in this story. It hasn't earned the letters. She fought it for a little over a year, and then it was just Marcus, a baby monitor crackling in an empty house, and a company that suddenly meant a great deal less than everyone around him assumed. Here is the arithmetic Marcus did in a folding chair at her funeral, staring at his own shoes. A company can run without your face in the lobby. A toddler cannot run without his father in the doorway, so Marcus did something his lawyer called unusual, and his accountant called a mistake he'd regret. He stepped down as CEO, and he moved every share he controlled, 61% of Bellwether Precision, the controlling stake, the whole thing, into a family trust named for his wife and son, the C.T. Bell Trust, Camille and Theo. On paper, the majority owner of the company stopped being a man named Marcus and became a line item in a filing cabinet in Columbus. Sole trustee, one signature required, and that signature was his. But you would have needed a court order and a good reason to ever find that out. Nobody had either. Nobody looked. Then Marcus went out and hired his own replacement. Her name was Catherine Vance. Ivy polished, headhunter's dream, a smile engineered for magazine covers and quarterly earnings calls. Marcus hired her precisely because she was everything he wasn't, Ungin, camera-ready, fluent in the language of investors and boards, and the kind of confidence that fills a room before a person does. The deal in his head was simple, and, he thought, airtight. She runs the boardroom and the press, he keeps the machines honest as a contractor. And he is in the school pickup line by 3:15 every afternoon, no exceptions. New hires called him Marcus, the machine guy. He preferred it. The only person left in the whole building who remembered the truth was Gloria Reed, the company controller. 62 years old, reading glasses on a chain of little wooden beads, keeper of the book since the garage days. When nobody else was in earshot, she still called him boss. For 3 years, Marcus corrected her, gently, every time. Then, about 8 months before that November morning, he stopped correcting her. Because here is the thing about handing another person your spotlight. Some people hold it for you and hand it back warm. And some people stand in it long enough that they start to believe they are the source of the light. People ask how a man loses control of his own company without noticing. The honest answer is that he does notice. He just notices in fractions. In Marcus's trade, there is a word for exactly that. Drift. A machine can slide out of tolerance so slowly that every single day looks completely normal, and the part it finally ruins looks like a random accident. It never was an accident. It was drift, adding up in silence, 1/1000th of an inch at a time. Catherine's first year, in fairness, was strong. Revenue climbed. New contracts landed. Cameras came into the lobby twice a month for one thing or another. Marcus told himself the noise was the whole point. He'd hired a spotlight, and spotlights are supposed to run hot. The drift started in year 2, and it started with the walls. She called it a brand refresh. Fresh paint, glass partitions, a redesigned heritage display in the lobby. When the contractors finished, the garage photograph, I'll say, Reuben and the borrowed welder, and Marcus and the son, was gone. Marcus found it a month later in a supply closet, face down in a plastic bin labelled Archive. He stood there holding it a long time. Then he set it back in the bin and told himself a picture is not a company. Then it was the story itself. One evening Marcus stopped for gas on Euclid and saw her face on the magazine rack by the register, Rust Belt Quarterly, glossy as a new hood. The woman who rebuilt Bellwether. He read the whole thing standing next to the windshield fluid. 9 pages. His name appeared exactly 0 times. Ruben's name appeared 0 times. The garage had become Humble Regional Roots. Marcus paid for his coffee and drove to work, and said nothing at all. By year 3, the new employee orientation video described the company as founded by a small local crew and reimagined under visionary leadership. Marcus watched 23-year-olds nod along to it in the break room. One of them, a genuinely sweet kid in quality control, once explained the history of Bellwether Precision to its actual founder while they waited for the coffee machine. "Catherine literally built this place out of nothing," the kid said. "She's a legend." Marcus refilled his cup and agreed that she was something. You want to know why he stayed quiet through all of it? Part of it was the plan. Quiet was the promise he'd made to himself in a folding chair at a funeral. But part of it, and let's be honest, was pride wearing the costume of patience. Marcus told himself he didn't need the credit. He needed the pickup line at 3:15, and for a long while that math held. Right up until a Thursday when it didn't. Quarterly operations review, 12 people around a long table. Catherine at the head in a suit the colour of fresh cream, a heavy silver pen in her hand that she clicked whenever she wanted the room's attention. And the room had learned that click the way a dog learns a leash. Agenda item 7 was a supplier switch on the titanium alloy they used for the surgical housings. New vendor, 22% cheaper, missing 2 fatigue certifications. Marcus flagged it the way you'd flag a smell of gas in a basement. Calmly, but clearly. She let him finish. Then she gave the room that magazine smile, glanced around the table and said, "For anyone who hasn't been introduced, this is Marcus. He consults for us. On the machines." A pause, timed like a stand-up comic. "Marcus, sweetheart, the certifications are a paperwork formality. This is exactly the kind of legacy caution I keep having to talk the board out of. Legacy caution." The room did the thing rooms do. A couple of people laughed because she was watching to see who would. A couple studied their notepads like the answer was written there. And Marcus looked at her for a second and finally let himself see what he'd been refusing to see. She wasn't trimming costs, she was staging a performance, and he was the prop she needed for the bit. He didn't argue. A man who has spent his whole life around spinning tooling knows you do not win a fight with a blade by shouting at it. You cut the power to it. So he said one word, noted, and wrote a single word on his legal pad. The word was drift. After the meeting, a project engineer caught him at the elevators, checked the hallway both directions like a man about to jaywalk and whispered that he was sorry about all that. That's what fear smells like inside a company. Apologies passed hand to hand like something illegal. Marcus told him he had nothing to apologise for. Then Marcus went down to the floor and quietly flagged every lot of the new cheap titanium for double inspection under his own authorization code. If Catherine wanted to gamble with the company's money, that was her problem. Nobody gambles with an operating room. That night he stayed. Empty floor, 1 desk lamp, a stack of vendor invoices, a red pen, and coffee going cold at his elbow. If she wanted to call him overhead, fine. Overhead reads everything. It took him 3 hours to find it. A vendor called Apex Advisory Partners. Strategic consulting. $32,000 a month. Invoices as vague as a horoscope. Market positioning. Stakeholder alignment. Executive advisory support. No deliverables, no work product, no name contact anyone in the building had ever met. The billing had started small a couple of years back and had grown like something in an X-ray. Total to date, just over $1.2 million. And the dates told the whole story on their own. Every invoice spiked in the weeks right before a board meeting, like somebody refilling an ammunition crate before the general sat down at the table. Marcus followed the address through 2 shell LLCs, the way you trace a bad wire through a wall, tapping until it hums. The trail dead-ended at a registered agent, and behind the agent, a condo in a nice suburb east of the city. He knew the name on the deed before he finished typing it into the search bar. Roland Vance, Catherine's younger brother. The man who had, at the previous Christmas party, raised a glass and toasted family with Marcus's own champagne in his hand. Marcus sat in that empty office and felt something he wants me to describe carefully, because you have probably felt it yourself and never had the word for it. It was not rage. Rage is loud and stupid and quick. This was quieter and much heavier, like standing under a slow leak in a roof you framed with your own two hands, feeling the drip find the back of your neck, understanding it's been running long before you noticed. Rage makes a man careless. This thing made Marcus precise. Monday morning, he asked Gloria to stay after the payroll run and closed the office door. "I need you to start keeping records," he told her. "Real timesheets, real invoices, every one of them dated, backed up twice, and nowhere near this company's servers." Gloria looked at him over those reading glasses for a long moment. She didn't ask what he'd found. She asked, "How far back do you want me to go, boss?" He said, "As far back as it takes." What the two of them built over the next several months was not revenge. Be very clear about that because it matters for everything that comes later. It was documentation. A navy blue notebook that never once touched a network. Certified copies. A fireproof box in a rented storage unit off the interstate, leased under his late mother's maiden name. Every padded invoice laid line by line against what the real market price should have been. Every backup logged twice, and while they worked, the drift kept right on drifting, almost as if the building could feel what Marcus now knew. His badge died on a Tuesday. Just stopped working at the turnstile. Red light, the little refusal beep, a line forming behind him while he tried it again. The guard at the security desk, a man named Walt who'd known Marcus since the garage, went grey with embarrassment as he printed out a paper visitor sticker. Visitor, in block letters, stuck to the shirt of the man whose name was on the roof. "Clerical thing," the email said. The clerical thing took 11 days to fix. Then the apprenticeship program disappeared. Marcus had started it in year 4 and quietly named it after his father, the tool and die man. 6 kids a year out of the trade schools, paid, mentored, hired at the end. Catherine relaunched it at a press event as the Vance Fellowship. New logo, same kids. Her name stitched where an old machinist's used to be. Marcus watched the ribbon cutting from the very back of the room and kept his face like a poured slab of concrete. Then came the annual Investor Day. Lights down, music up, and on slide 40 of her keynote was Marcus's own vibration-damping fixture. His design. His patent. The one whose certificate hangs framed in his basement. On the screen over her silhouette, it said, "Innovation. Delivered." The room applauded. She lowered her head, humble as a queen at her own coronation. Marcus applauded too. The steel doesn't listen to your excuses, it answers to your hands. But here is the moment that turned a slow leak into an actual war. It came from Gloria 3 weeks later, on a Sunday night, by a burner phone. Because by then the two of them had stopped trusting the building. Someone in the CEO's office had been pulling documents. Not money documents. Ownership documents. The full capitalization table. Every version of it going back to the founding. Filings about the C.T. Bell Trust. 2 formal written requests sent to the law firm in Columbus. Both of them politely refused. And for exactly 31 minutes that Friday, sitting misfiled on a shared drive before someone snatched it back. A banker's presentation stamped confidential. Gloria got a screenshot of every page. The deck had a name. Project Summit. Marcus read it at his own kitchen table, after Theo was asleep, and his hands went cold at page 6. Black Pine Capital, a private equity firm out of Chicago, in quiet early talks to acquire the dormant estate stake. 61% of Bellwether Precision. The deck described the seller as a passive family trust administered by disinterested trustees, and in the tidy language of men who have never met the thing they're buying, likely a motivated seller at the right discount. There was a chart, an actual chart, projecting how cheap the stake could be driven if the company's margins kept sliding through the year. Margins. She was bleeding the company herself, $32,000 a month at a time. She had found the trust. She had looked straight at a dead woman's initials and a 6-year-old's inheritance and read them as an abandoned vault nobody had the combination to. She wasn't skimming anymore. She was preparing to sell the whole machine out from under it. And she genuinely believed the owner was a ghost. She was half right. There was a ghost in that building. It just wasn't Camille. It was Marcus, and ghosts see everything. The next 11 months of Marcus's life looked, from the outside, aggressively boring. That was the entire design. Monday through Friday, he was the machine guy. The quiet contractor with the visitor-grade badge, nodding in hallways, fixing fixtures, eating lunch alone at a table by the loading dock. Nights and weekends, he was something else entirely. He and Gloria built the case the way you build an aerospace part, slowly, to spec, with documentation for every single cut. The blue notebook filled up. Real vendor quotes laid beside Apex's invoices, the padding sitting there in black and red. Purchase orders approved out of sequence. A warehouse lease the company had been faithfully paying on a building that, according to county records, was an empty gravel lot. And then the emails, deleted but not gone, because nothing is ever truly gone when the backup system was designed by a man who never trusted software. Marcus had built those retention systems himself, back when he still signed the checks. One email thread between Catherine and Roland, 8 months old, ended on a single sentence that Marcus must have read 50 times. Keep it quiet until the estate clears. After that, none of it matters. None of it matters. Hold that sentence. We come back to it. That same week he hired Patricia Osei, the attorney in Columbus who administered the filings for the C.T. Bell Trust. A calm, unhurried woman with steady eyes who bills in 6-minute increments and, in all the time Marcus has known her, has never once raised her voice. He told her everything. She listened the way a surgeon listens, then told him 2 things. First, that Ohio is a one-party consent state, which meant Marcus could lawfully record any conversation he himself was part of. Second, that he should go buy a very good recorder. He bought 2. One lived in the breast pocket of his jacket. The other lived in the console of his truck in case a day ever came when the jacket didn't make it out of the building. Then came the Thursday that still wakes him up sometimes. Patricia called his cell at 4 in the afternoon, and her voice was flat in the careful way that means a lawyer is choosing every word. "Marcus," she said, "I need you to tell me whether you ever signed a delegation of voting authority. Roughly 3 years ago." March. Marcus stood very still in his kitchen. "I have never signed a delegation of anything." "Then someone signed it for you," she said. "It came to me by courier this morning. Backdated, notarized by a notary whose commission had already expired. It names the company's chief executive as the authorized proxy for the trust's shares, and it carries your signature. Not a forgery scrawled by hand, Marcus, a perfect one, because it came from a stamp. Back when Marcus was still CEO, the company had ordered a signature stamp for high-volume purchasing paperwork. An ordinary thing. Thousands of companies have one. His had been sitting in the executive suite's safe for 4 years, in a drawer he no longer had the key to, 2 feet from where Catherine Vance hung her cream-coloured blazers. Forgery is not a small word. It is not a misunderstanding you clear up over dinner. It is a decision a person makes on purpose, believing the other person is too small, too quiet, too far beneath them to ever look closely enough to catch it. She had stared at her dead wife's initials on a trust, decided the man behind them didn't count, and pressed his own name down onto a page like it was a tool she'd found lying around her office. That night Marcus drove out to the lakefront and parked facing the water. The city lights smeared across the black surface, a freighter somewhere out past a breakwall giving one long note on its horn. He thought about Camille's old laptop, still in the bedroom closet because he'd never been able to make himself give it away. He thought about his father's hands. And here is something Marcus has never told a single person. Not Gloria, not Patricia, not even Camille, while she was alive. 7 years ago, the company hit a wall. A major customer went bankrupt, owing Bellwether $1.6 million, and payroll was 8 days from bouncing for 200 families. Marcus didn't call the bank. Banks take weeks. Instead, he sold his father's machines. The lathe, the mill, the tools Samuel Bell had oiled every Sunday of Marcus's entire childhood, sold to a collector down in Cincinnati. Then he took a second mortgage on the house Camille had picked, the house Theo sleeps in right now. He wired every dollar of it into the company through a bridge account and told everyone they'd landed an early payment from a client. Payroll cleared. Nobody ever knew. The collector mailed him a photograph of the lathe afterward, polished under showroom lights like a museum piece, and Marcus couldn't make himself look at it twice. You do things like that quietly because you don't want the people you're protecting to feel the weight of it. That's the story Marcus told himself, sitting by that lake, with a forged version of his own name 3 years old and about to be used against him. He finally heard the other half of the truth. If you make sure nobody ever sees you carry the load, eventually somebody will decide you never carried anything at all. Catherine said the quiet part out loud a month later, at the company's 16th anniversary gala downtown. Chandeliers, a jazz trio, champagne that Marcus was, in a very literal sense, paying for. She found him standing near the bar in a floor-length silver dress, hair like a commercial. That magazine smile turned all the way up. She was beautiful the way a good blade is beautiful, and she knew both of those facts about herself. She touched her glass to his and said, in a voice as warm as bathwater, "I want you to know I actually respect you, Marcus. Truly, companies like this get built by men like you, good with their hands, steady, loyal, and then they get run by people like me. You were never meant to be the mind of this place, honey. You were the hands, and the hands photographed beautifully." The recorder in Marcus's breast pocket was running. Ohio is a one-party consent state. He looked at her for a moment. The trio played. Somewhere behind her, Roland was laughing with two board members, telling a story with his whole body. And the last soft, forgiving thing left inside Marcus Bell quietly closed for business. "That's a hell of a toast," he said, and he raised his glass and he walked away. She counted that as a win. People like her always mistake silence for surrender. Here's what she was actually doing while the trio played, bleeding the patient to buy it cheaper. The Apex invoices had doubled. 2 contracts had been quietly repriced into the red on purpose. And that November, a restructuring memo leaked onto the shop floor. 58 names penciled in for layoffs. Marcus read the list in the break room with his coffee going cold. Reuben's name was 9th. Reuben, the welder who'd worked 2 months for Cold Cuts, whose daughter was at Ohio State on the tuition assistance program Marcus himself had started. That list wasn't cost-cutting. That list was Catherine dragging the company's price tag down with a red pen, 58 families at a time. That's the moment Marcus stopped being a man collecting evidence and became a man choosing a date. Gloria found the date for him, a calendar invitation forwarded through 3 assistants before it landed where it shouldn't have. Project Summit, signing ceremony. Friday 5 p.m, 14th floor boardroom. Black Pine Capital was flying in. The forged delegation would let Catherine vote the trust's shares in favour of the sale. Wire transfers were queued for the following Monday. After that, none of it matters. Now you know exactly what that sentence meant. Once the sale closed and the money crossed state lines, unwinding the whole thing could take years in court. Marcus might not even win. So Patricia prepared the paperwork over 2 sleepless nights. Revocations, certifications. A criminal referral packet with the blue notebook scanned cover to cover. Everything dated, sealed and ready to fire. The plan was to serve all of it Friday morning. Quiet, surgical. Done before the ceremony ever started. But Catherine changed the schedule on them, because Friday morning she called an all-hands town hall. Every employee, cameras rolling for the internal live stream. Rain hammering the parking lot, the auditorium smelling like wet coats and burnt coffee. She stood on the stage in cream and pearls and announced a transformational new partnership with Black Pine Capital. The applause came thin and confused, and then with the cameras live, she looked down at a note card and smiled the smile of a woman unwrapping a gift she'd wrapped herself. "And as we turn this exciting page," she said, "some of our long-time relationships will naturally conclude. Effective today, Marcus Bell's no longer with Bellwether Precision. We thank him for his contribution over the years." 300 heads turned. A camera found him against the back wall, standing between a trophy case and a fire extinguisher. 2 security guards were already moving towards him. 2 men he had personally trained on the evacuation drills, so ashamed they couldn't lift their eyes off the floor tile. Somebody's phone was streaming it. And a young reporter from the company's own internal channel actually pushed a microphone toward him and asked, on his way out, whether he had any comment. Understand something about that moment. Marcus was not crying, he was not shouting. His heart rate barely moved. And that wasn't toughness, it was it was arithmetic. She had just fired him in front of every witness in the company, on camera. 4 hours before, she needed absolutely no one looking at her. She had also, without knowing it, just handed him the cleanest stage a counter-move ever gets. On his way out, he stopped by the supply closet and took exactly one thing. A photograph, face down in a bin labelled Archive. Reuben, a borrowed welder, a garage, the sun. Then he stood under the entrance awning, rain coming down like dropped rivets, took out his phone and called Gloria. She picked up on the second ring. Through the glass doors he could see Catherine up on her stage, shaking hands with a man from Chicago. "Fire every one of them," Marcus said. There was a pause on the line, not surprise, the particular quiet of a woman who had been waiting 11 months to hear exactly those 4 words. "Understood," Gloria said. "I'm on it." He hung up, called Mrs. Okafor next door and asked her to grab Theo from school and get started on the waffles because Friday is waffle night and some contracts don't get broken. Then he looked at his watch. 10 past 10. The signing ceremony was at 5, 7 hours, 11 months, 1 stamp with his name on it. Time to go collect his company. "I want to ask you something before we walk into that boardroom, and I want you to actually answer it." Marcus stayed silent for 11 months while a rubber stamp of his signature quietly rented out his name to a woman selling his life. Type 1 in the comments if that patience was wisdom. Type 2 if you think he let her go way too far. Lock your answer in now. The next 7 hours are going to decide who's right. At 4:40 that afternoon, the 14th floor boardroom looked like a photograph in a business magazine. Rain streaking the glass wall over the river. Catering nobody had touched. Black pine capital on one side of the long table. 3 lawyers deep, fountain pens lined up like surgical instruments. Catherine at the head, cream suit, pearls, the silver pen. Roland lounged 2 seats down, tie loosened, wearing the easy confidence of a man convinced the hard part was already behind him. The signature pages sat in the centre of the table, in neat flagged stacks. 61% of Marcus Bell's life, dressed up in little coloured tabs that said, "Sign here." Marcus rode the elevator up, watching the floor numbers climb, still wearing the same rain-damp jacket she'd fired him in that morning. Patricia Osei stood on his left with a litigation case. Gloria Reed stood on his right, holding a thin folder and a small flash drive, her reading glasses pushed up into her grey hair, like a woman rolling up her sleeves. The doors opened. The 2 security guards from that morning were posted at the boardroom entrance. The taller one looked at Marcus, looked at Patricia, and stepped aside like a man grateful for the excuse to be somewhere else. They walked in on the tail end of one of Catherine's sentences. It died in the air. For 1 full second, nobody in the room moved. Then the silver pen clicked twice, fast. "Marcus?" Her voice reached for the boardroom and almost made it. "You can't be in this building. You were separated this morning. Gentlemen, I apologise. This is a former contractor with hurt feelings. Security. Neither guard moved. Loyalty or curiosity. Either one did the job." Patricia set her case on the table, unhurried as ever. "Good afternoon. Patricia Osei, counsel for the C.T. Bell Trust. Here's the detail Marcus will remember when he's an old man." Catherine relaxed. She actually smiled and gestured toward an empty chair. Because in her version of the world, the trust's lawyer showing up meant the seller had finally come to the table to close. She pulled the chair out herself. "Wonderful. We've been told the trustees preferred to sign remotely." "There are no trustees," Patricia said. She let that hang for 1 beat. "There is 1 trustee. But before we get to that," a housekeeping question for the record, "Mrs. Vance, this entire transaction rests on a delegation of voting authority, executed about 3 years ago, in March. Who signed it?" The lead attorney for Blackpine looked up sharply. Lawyers can smell the weather change before anyone else in the room. "The trustee of record signed it," Catherine said. "It's in the data room. Certified." "Certified," Patricia repeated, "by a notary whose commission had expired 16 months before the date on the page. Which is a problem." She laid a single sheet on the table like a card she'd been holding all night. "And signed with a signature stamp stored in this building's executive safe. Which is a much larger problem. The trust has never delegated authority to anyone. I happen to know that with unusual confidence, because the sole trustee of the C.T. Bell Trust is standing to my left." Every head in the room turned toward Marcus, the wet contractor, the legacy caution, the hands. "Marcus Bell," Patricia said, "sole trustee of the C.T. Bell Trust, sole signatory on its shares, legal guardian of its beneficiary, and, through that trust, the owner of 61% of Bellwether Precision. The stake you gentlemen flew in this afternoon to purchase belongs, in full, to the man Ms. Vance had escorted off this property at 10 o'clock this morning. On your live stream. Silence has a weight to it. Marcus had written that line in the blue notebook months earlier, in his own handwriting, and now he finally got to feel it from the good side of the table. Catherine laughed. One short note, the kind meant to invite the whole room to laugh along. The room declined. This is absurd. The trust is Camille Bell's estate. It's administered by attorneys. Marcus was an engineering contractor. He fixes machines. She turned to the Black Pine partners, and her Polish cracked right down the centre. He's the hands, that's all he has ever been. Ask anyone in this building. She spun back on Patricia. Your firm refused to name the trustee. Twice. A stake nobody claims is a stake nobody's watching. Any reasonable buyer would assume. Assumptions aren't due diligence, Ms. Vance, Patricia said. They're confessions with better posture. Play it, Marcus said quietly. Gloria slid the flash drive into the console at the end of the table, and Catherine Vance's own voice filled her own boardroom, warm as bathwater, over her own speakers. You were never meant to be the mind of this place, honey. You were the hands, and the hands photographed beautifully. Her face went the exact colour of her suit. You're right about one thing, Marcus said. His voice was level, because 11 months buys a man a level voice. I am the hands. This morning you fired the hands in front of 300 people. This afternoon, the hands own every share in this room. The lead Black Pine partner closed his leather portfolio. It made one small click, and that click was the loudest sound of the entire day. A deal dying doesn't sound like thunder. It sounds like a folder closing. Ms. Vance, the partner said, standing and buttoning his jacket. Black Pine was presented a clean cellar and clean books. We appear to have neither. We're withdrawing. Our counsel will be in touch regarding the representations made to our fund. His eyes went to the forged delegation on the table, then back to her. Representations made, it appears, personally. Patricia slid one last envelope down the table. Catherine stopped it with 2 fingers, like it might bite her. Notice of an emergency session of the Board of Directors, Patricia said. 7 o'clock this evening. The Trust, holding 61%, has already voted its shares. You are suspended as Chief Executive, effective immediately, pending review of the items in that envelope. Effective immediately? Marcus hadn't chosen those words for her. She taught the whole building that phrase herself, that very morning. And Marcus has always believed in using proven tooling. He picked up one of the flagged signature pages, looked at the tab that said, Sign Here, and set it gently back down on the stack. Nothing here is for sale, he said. Meeting's at 7. Bring the pen. The board convened at 7, in the same room, and it smelled like cold coffee and consequences. Patricia walked the directors through all of it without once raising her voice. The Apex invoices laid against real market pricing. 1.9 million skimmed. The phantom warehouse lease on a gravel lot. The 2 contracts repriced below cost on purpose. The recovered emails, including the one that ended, none of it matters. And the delegation, with its dead notary seal and its stolen stamp of Marcus's signature. Then the recording played once, all the way through, while Catherine studied the tabletop and the directors studied her. She tried twice to save it. The first attempt was polish. This is a coordinated misreading of routine transactions, and I would welcome an independent review. Nobody blinked. Accountants do not misread a gravel lot pretending to be a warehouse. The second attempt was quieter, and it was aimed directly at Marcus. Marcus, we can handle this privately. There's a version of tonight where nobody gets humiliated. We're both better than a spectacle. Marcus thought about the auditorium that morning, the cameras she had ordered, the microphone shoved at his face on a live stream she'd staged for 300 of his people. You had 11 months to handle it quietly, he said. You spent them renting out a stamp of my name. You chose the spectacle this morning. I'm just keeping to your production schedule. The vote took 9 minutes by Marcus's watch. 9 minutes to unwind 4 years of borrowed light. Removal for cause, unanimous, with one abstention from a director who'd golfed with her too many times to meet anyone's eyes. The Ford delegation went to outside counsel with the referral packet. Her corporate cards were cancelled while she was still sitting in the chair. And Gloria had not been idle since 10 past 10 that morning. By the time the vote closed, every Vance hire in the building had been terminated with fully documented cause. the procurement director who'd waved Apex's invoices through, the communications chief who'd scrubbed the garage out of the orientation video, the brand officer who'd taken Marcus's old parking spot. 6 people, 6 files, 6 clean letters. Fire every one of them isn't rage. When a man has spent 11 months making sure every last letter would survive a wrongful termination lawsuit, it's just housekeeping. Roland never made it to the meeting. He'd left for the airport the moment the black pine folder clicked shut, and his badge died at the turnstile on his way out. Clerical errors move very fast when the paperwork behind them is honest. Catherine left the building at 8:40. Marcus didn't gloat at the door. He didn't need to, and he didn't want to. He watched from the mezzanine as she crossed the lobby with a single white box, heels ticking on the stone like a metronome winding down. She stopped for a second at the empty stretch of wall where the heritage display used to be, where the garage photograph was already back on its hook, because Marcus had asked Walt to rehang it that afternoon. First thing, before the board meeting, before anything, Reuben, the borrowed welder, the son. Her hand tightened around that silver pen until her knuckles went white. Not the grip of a woman who'd lost a job, the grip of a woman holding the last object that still believed she was in charge. Then she walked out into the rain, and the doors slid shut. Here's what Marcus actually felt, and it's the part the cameras never catch. Not triumph. Tiredness. The very specific tiredness of finally setting down something so heavy you'd forgotten your body was carrying it. He stood on that mezzanine while the cleaning crew buffed the lobby floor, and he let out a breath he'd been holding since a Thursday 11 months earlier. Then he looked at his watch and left before the directors were done shaking hands, because it was Friday, and Friday has a contract on it. He was home by 9. The house smelled like butter. Mrs. Okafor had left a note on the counter in careful cursive and a stack of waffles under a towel. Theo was on the couch in rocket ship pyjamas, hair still damp from the bath, holding his favourite spacebook like a briefcase. "Daddy, you're late for waffle night." "I know, bud. Something ran long at work." "Did you have a good day at work?" Marcus sat down next to him. His son, 6 years old, warm as a furnace, smelling like shampoo. The owner threw a trust of 61% of a precision machining company and 0% of a single worry in the whole world. That was the point. That had always been the entire point. "Best one in a long while," Marcus said. "Countdown's on you," Theo said, because that's their thing, and they read about rockets until the rain finally stopped. The papers would eventually say it took 6 hours. They were off by 11 months. But headlines were never built for men like Marcus Bell. Real justice doesn't arrive like it does in the movies. There's no gavel echoing in a marble hall while the music swells. It arrives like machining. Pass after pass, each one taking off a little more material, until what's left is the true shape of what somebody actually did. The independent forensic audit took 10 weeks. 2 accountants with no sense of humour lived in the conference room with a coffee maker. When they were finished, the number had grown teeth. 2.4 million, routed through Apex, and 2 smaller shells. A phantom lease, contracts repriced below cost to bruise the valuation before the sale. And, framed in exhibit tabs now instead of investor slides, 1 backdated delegation, 1 expired notary, 1 signature stamp that had walked out of a safe and onto paper. It had no business touching. Patricia's referral packet reached the US Attorney's Office before Thanksgiving. Wire fraud crosses state lines the moment the money does, and this money had done a great deal of travelling. Roland went first. Federal agents met him at the airport 3 weeks later, boarding a one-way flight west with a laptop he really should have wiped. He was cooperative within the hour, and naming his sister by dinner. His plea came fast: restitution, forfeiture of the suburban condo, and a sentence measured in months instead of years, bought with testimony. Catherine held out longer. Her lawyers were excellent, but recordings are stubborn things, and Ohio is a one-party consent state, and the woman on that recording had laid out her entire philosophy in her own voice, at her own gala. When the notary folded, and the paralegal who'd fetched the stamp described the safe and the drawer and the date, she took a plea in the spring: wire fraud, and 1 count tied to the forged instrument. Full restitution, paid in part by the sale of a lake house Marcus had apparently helped finance without ever knowing it. A permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. And 32 months in a federal facility, followed by supervised release. At sentencing, the judge, Oida Achar, a grey-haired woman with a machinist's patience, said something Marcus wrote down on an index card. The defendant did not steal because she needed money. She stole because she was certain the man she stole from lacked the standing to object. Standing. Lawyers use that word one way. Marcus uses it another. Both of them fit. That same magazine ran a new cover in April, because magazines do. Rust Belt Quarterly. This time Marcus's photograph taken in front of the garage wall, in his real work jacket, because he turned down their stylist. The headline said, "The founder they erased." He didn't frame it. 9 pages, and the only sentence he gave them was this one. "I built a company quietly, and quiet got mistaken for absent. That's the whole story. Inside the plant, the repairs looked like paperwork too, just the good kind." The 58-name layoff list went through the shredder publicly, in the break room, with coffee and donuts, and nobody was laid off. The cheap titanium went back to the certified supplier. The 2 quality supervisors who'd been quietly demoted for asking questions got their titles back, with back pay calculated to the dollar by Gloria Barentway, who cried once, briefly, at her desk and then flatly denied it. Gloria became Chief Financial Officer, which mostly meant her title finally caught up to the truth. The apprenticeship got its name back, Samuel Bell's name stitched onto 6 new sets of coveralls, and on the first day of the new class, Marcus stood in the back and watched a 19-year-old girl from a trade school square up a block of aluminum like it owed her money, and he had to go stand in the hallway for a minute. People asked why Marcus didn't just take the CEO chair back. He told the board the truth. The company needs a full-time chief executive. Theo needs a full-time father. Those are both real jobs, and I know which one I can't be replaced at. He kept the chairman's seat, his toolbox and the pickup line at 3:15. The plant manager of a dozen years, a man who says maybe 40 words a day, and every one of them load-bearing, became president. One Saturday in May, Marcus drove down to Cincinnati alone. The collector still had the lathe, front of the showroom, roped off, polished like a war memorial. The man recognised him before he gave his name, which meant he'd read the magazine. Marcus asked what it would take. The collector looked at him a long moment and said, "It was never really for sale, you know. I was holding it." Marcus paid exactly what the man had paid him 7 years earlier, not $1 more, because that was all that was asked. The lathe sits in the bellwether lobby now, under the garage photograph, with a small brass plate that reads, "Every company is built by somebody's hands." And here is one true thing about Catherine. Offered because carrying hate is heavy, and Marcus already carries a 6-year-old and a company. During the civil depositions, he learned that her mother had spent 30 years as a typist at a downtown firm, keying other people's names onto work she'd half-built, invisible at every office party. Catherine grew up watching that and swore it would never be her. Somewhere along the way, being seen stopped being armour and became the whole religion. Credit wasn't vanity to her, it was oxygen. None of that excuses a stamp of another man's name on a forged page. Nothing excuses that. But it let Marcus set the anger down. And setting things down, it turns out, is a skill a man can get very good at. 3 months later, on a July Saturday morning, the Bell kitchen table was covered in newspaper, and a birdhouse was drying in the middle of it, painted a red so loud the birds may file a complaint. Theo did the painting. Marcus did the cutting. Theo did the sanding. Small block, small hands, tongue out sideways in concentration, exactly the way his grandfather looked at a lathe. They measured twice. They always measure twice. When you're 6, that rule is about birdhouses. Later on, it's about everything. Halfway through holding the little perch in place, Theo looked up with that ambush timing kids have. "Dad, Mrs. Okafor says your name is on the wall at your work, is it really?" "It is, bud. Because you made the whole company." Marcus held the perch steady for him. "Because a lot of people made it. Grandpa's hands, your mum's brain, Reuben's welding, Miss Gloria's math. My job was just to keep it safe. Same as what you're doing with this birdhouse right now." The boy nodded, satisfied. The way you nod at 6 when the world checks out. "Countdown's on you," he told the birdhouse. That was the whole war, debriefed at his level. Somebody tried to take the thing you keep safe. You kept it safe. Pass the syrup. People ask whether Marcus regrets the 11 months. Not the outcome. the silence, whether he should have stood up in that very first meeting and flipped the table and played the hero. It's a fair question, because we're raised on stories where loud is how you know a person is strong. But here's what Marcus learned from his father, and from a blue notebook, and from the worst Friday and the best Friday of his life, which turned out to be the exact same Friday. Loud is a performance. Documentation is a language. And the people who dismiss you are usually fluent in only one of the two. She called him the hands. She wasn't wrong. She just never read the fine print on the word. Hands are what hold a thing up. Hands are what carry the weight when nobody is watching. And hands, given 11 patient months, are what walk into a boardroom at 4:40 on a Friday and set an entire building back down on its foundation without ever once raising their voice. So here's the index card from this story, the one worth taping next to your coffee maker. If somebody at work, or in your family, or in your life, ever tells you that you're just the muscle, just the help, just the quiet one who fixes things, don't argue with them that day. Don't perform for a room they control. Go home. Write down what they said, the date, and what you actually built. Read it back in the morning, out loud. If it still sounds like respect in the daylight, let it go. But if it sounds like a bill wearing a compliment's clothes, start your file. Keep it dated. Keep it backed up twice, because patience without proof is just suffering. But patience with proof is a loaded spring. The people who mistake your silence for weakness are telling you, out loud, exactly how they plan to lose. There's a lathe in a lobby now, with an old machinist's fingerprints worn deep into the metal. There's a birdhouse on a porch rail with a crooked perch that Marcus will never straighten as long as he lives. And there's a 6-year-old asleep down the hall who will grow up thinking the most interesting thing about his father is the waffles. That's the legacy. Not the shares, not the name on the wall. The version of yourself your kid copies when he thinks nobody's watching. Tongue out sideways, measuring twice. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever built something quietly and had to watch someone louder collect the credit for it? What did you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reached you somewhere real, share it with one person who has ever been called just the muscle. And subscribe, because we tell the quiet owners' stories here every week. I'll be honest about why I told you this one. It isn't the boardroom, it's the index cards in a lunchbox. I keep meeting people who carry entire companies, entire families on their backs, and get called just anything, just the assistant, just the help, just the quiet one. If that's you, this story is your index card. Quiet doesn't mean absent. Underestimated doesn't mean beaten. Write things down, stay kind, stay patient. And when your moment finally comes, you won't need to raise your voice either. The receipts will do the talking.